Well, it has been 1 year to the day since President Biden signed the CHIPS and Science Act. The law intends to rebuild the U.S. semiconductor industry with $231 billion in new investments. So let's kind of get a status report. Quite a few major semiconductor manufacturers have made large investments in the U.S., but so far labor shortages and construction issues have delayed operations. Taiwan Semiconductor, also known as TSMC, has been pushing back the opening of its Phoenix, Arizona factory by a year. The world's biggest chip maker was supposed to start production of chips for iPhones and MacBooks in the new facility next year, but now it looks like the doors will not open until 2025. So joining us now with insight into the future of the program, Aaron Chatterji, known as Ronnie, former White House chips coordinator. He is now back at Duke University as professor of business and public policy. Thank you so much for being here. We have been watching the fruits of the CHIPS Act very avidly here around the country with all these plans for factories. But it has been sort of a tough road here, in part because of labor to build and staff those factories, Ronnie. So how are you sort of thinking about it status-wise and where we are right now?
Well, thanks for having me. I feel really good about where we're at today on the 1 year anniversary of the CHIPS and Science Act signing. I was there when President Biden signed the bill, and he said today is a day for builders. And we've been building all around the country $166 billion of private sector investment in the chips industry since we passed the bill. So things are in great shape from that vantage point. There's a lot of interest from the companies in the program. So you're seeing those investments. That's just private sector investment before the money's been handed out. And so now you're seeing over 400 companies, 460 by today's count, that have filed statements of interest to access the CHIPS funding. So I'm confident that that money's going to go out. We're going to have announcements before the end of the year, and you're going to continue to see those projects move forward. The chip business is a cyclical business, and it's up and down. But over the long run, I think we're going to see a tremendous increase in the production of chips here in the United States of America.
Hey, Ronnie, people who are watching are trying to figure out, for the sake of their portfolio, what makes businesses a good candidate or a company the best candidate to get the most amount of funding for a project, and how that goes about being evaluated.
Sure. I mean, when you do a big program like this to invest in a key sector of the economy, you got to be clear about what your goals and criteria are. Already, there's more applications than there is money. And so when you're thinking about companies, you should look at a strategy report that the CHIPS office released in February that outlined the criteria for the program and how they're going to make decisions. And I'll say at the top of that list is American national security. We are investing in chips to make sure our supply chains are more resilient, so we will not have to depend as much on other countries, particularly when they're geographically concentrated in particular parts of the world. And so companies that fulfill those national security objectives are going to be the ones that are going to do really well in the program. That's the number one criteria. There's a list of other criteria in the strategy report that was released in February by the CHIPS program office at the Commerce Department. A key thing we emphasized during the time I was there is we had to be clear about our goals. We cannot do everything for everyone. We need to be very focused and concise in those things. And you can look at that report for more details.
Have any of the applicants, particularly the large companies, been sort of chafing at any of those restrictions that are being put in place, the sort of limits or conditions that have been attached to getting this money?
In conversations with me, they did not chafe at those. I think the issues that you cited earlier about we need to make sure we have the best workforce ready to go on day one to make these factories productive. That's the big issue for a lot of companies that we're working with. I think when it comes to sort of the restrictions on investments around the world, providing benefits and childcare for their employees, these are things I didn't hear a lot about. And in fact, I think the proof is in the pudding. When you think about the 460 statements of interest, that's 460 projects that sort of people in the private sector have said, we'd like to access CHIPS funding. So to me, that's this proof as much as you can have that the program is working as designed, and you're seeing that interest as a result.
Are those companies then barred by taking some of the CHIPS funding? Are they barred from doing mass business with other parts of the world, and notably areas where there have been restrictions put in place, especially for intellectual property?
There'll be guardrails for the recipients of the CHIPS funding or those who use the investment tax credit with regards to building up leading edge capability, for example, in particular parts of the world. I mean, we need to make sure that as the U.S. government, we're not using our taxpayer dollars to subsidize sort of capabilities in other countries that are going to threaten our national security. And so those are reasonable rules of the road that will be in place for the recipients of CHIPS money. And it's something that I think is really important for the program and a widely shared value across the board.
So the administration has recently talked about major progress coming in the months ahead on the CHIPS Act and the recipients. What does that look like? What does major progress look like in the next, say, 6 months?
Fantastic. So what you're seeing now is private sector investment around the country. You're seeing factories being built, construction ongoing. These are private sector investments that really have been sort of supported by the signal of passing the CHIPS Act in the first place. But the money for those projects hasn't yet been granted. So what people should expect before the end of the year is major announcements about sort of deals that can happen in the economy to support those kinds of constructions around the United States. So you're already seeing fantastic private sector investment. Some of that's because people are bullish on the United States of America. A lot of it's also because they feel like this is the place to build chips in the future because of the CHIPS Act. You'll see announcements between now and the end of the year about sort of those deals going forward. And that's what you want to look for. And that's what the CHIPS office has been working on for the last year.
Are we able to yet quantify what success would look like, though?
Success will mean that we increase U.S. national security by building more leading-edge chip capability here in the United States. We should also be producing memory and mature semiconductors at scale. Those will be sort of decisions that are made in the CHIPS program that will be indicators of success. When you look at our capability, both on the leading edge, logic and memory, as well as some of the complementary activities like advanced packaging, research and development, that'll be an indicator if we build an infrastructure here that we're successful. We clearly outlined this, released it to the public, and people can keep score by looking at the investments that the CHIPS office is making and how it aligns with the objectives we set out. That was something that was really important from the beginning. A lot of times when government's making these large investments in the economy, you don't have those rules of the road. People can't keep score, and in the end, those projects don't go well. We have a clear criteria and a way for people to hold us accountable.
Ronnie, finally, I want to ask you about, on a related note, the report in the Wall Street Journal today that the U.S. is preparing to ban private equity and VC investment in some Chinese tech companies. Of course, this is just the latest in the sort of back and forth that we've seen between the U.S. and China. Is this the right way to approach trade and our economic partnership with China?
Well, I won't get ahead of the White House actually announcing those details because I don't want to comment on the press report yet.
Ronnie, you don't work there anymore. You can say whatever you want.
No, that's right. But I will say, so in my opinion, though, I mean, you look at global trade and you look at sort of the investments that are happening around the world, both in the chip industry and beyond. And I think that you're not necessarily seeing this big retrenchment from the global economy. What you're seeing is reasonable rules of the road being set out. It doesn't make sense for us to be subsidizing investments that are going to increase capabilities in other countries that could threaten U.S. national security. And so I think to the extent that these rules are making sure that doesn't happen, that's a good thing. We do have to make sure that global commerce can continue and investments can be made, and that'll benefit the United States in the end of the day. When you look at those 460 statements of interest from companies, when you look at the $166 billion of investment, that's coming from U.S. companies and foreign companies betting on the United States of America. We got to keep that system going, but we need reasonable rules of the road to make sure that we're not creating the capabilities in other places that threaten our national security. That's what it's about.
Ronnie, great to have you here with us today, and thanks so much for the time, really breaking down some of what is key to making this CHIPS Act be successful here, as well as much more around the industry. Ronnie Chatterji, former White House CHIPS coordinator and Duke University professor of business and public policy. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.